The UFC and Bellator both held events in the state of Texas this past weekend. Looking first at Bellator, which happened on Friday, September 16th in Austin, Texas. 4 fights were shown on the main card there on Spike TV. Starting with the first fight of the evening, Derek Campos against Jamal Chan in the 155 division. Khan really came out with a really awesome first round. Really was putting it to Derek Campos. Dropped him. Campos definitely had some success in the round, but his opponent there wearing the blue gloves was much better at finding his chin than Campos was. And in the second round, I think Campos was able to kind of figure out what was going on there with Chan and was able to mix up the striking as well as the wrestling, and a lot of those big, powerful looping shots that Chan was able to land in the first round were not having as much success, were kind of slower, and Campos was coming forward with a lot more straightforward movement, was really chasing down Chan, especially in round 3. He was really dictating the pace, had a couple of nice takedowns there, a couple of big slams, and really after that first round, took over, in my opinion, and showed why he's one of the top guys here for Bellator's 155 division. And this was a really nice win for him, especially coming off the win over Melvin Gillard not too long ago. So this is a nice win over, again, somebody he should beat, but still, in this division, you can't take anything for granted with the way things have been changing at the top. So Campos puts himself in a very nice position. I think Derek Anderson is also in a nice position, but one of these two guys has to get a bigger name. Now, Anderson has beat Pitbull twice, but other than that, he hasn't really faced too much elite competition for Bellator, and I think Campos is in the same group. So one of these two guys has to take on somebody big to get them towards the top, because I think both of them are very close to getting a title shot. And if Ben Henderson beats Michael Chandler soundly, or vice versa, however that goes, this division needs some contenders, and this is a guy in Derek Campos that can factor in. Next fight of the evening was in the women's flyweight division, as the much-hyped Anastasia Yanakova finally made her U.S. Bellator debut, taking on Veta Arteaga. And boy, Arteaga, she must not got the memo. I think they showed a tweet there on the Bellator broadcast that Yanakova was the one that was supposed to be dominating this fight. And Arteaga, she took the fight right to the Russian from the get-go, just non-stop action right in her face, not allowing Yanakova to breathe. And for a girl who only had 2 professional fights coming into this, one of them being on a Bellator card, she just went right at it. The native of Boise, Idaho, just took it right to her. Definitely had a very dominant first round. Into the second round, Arteaga was starting to slow down a bit. I mean, when you run a pace like that, I think it's only natural that you start to slow down a little bit. And Yanakova was really able to start working her kicks. Obviously, coming from a kickboxing background, Bellator is also hyping her up as doing some kickboxing for the organization at some point. So that was something that could be an X factor. Arteaga was pretty much moving forward with just punches. So if Yanakova can mix it up, make it more of a kickboxing, not just a street brawl, she could have some success. In round 2, you saw the kicks start opening up more, Arteaga slowing down, and Yanakova start landing to the head more as well. That second round was really close, but I would have gave it to Yanakova. I think that, again, the kicks were the difference, and Arteaga was definitely slowed down. And when it was round 3, Yanakova, it was definitely her round. Arteaga was definitely very slowed down at that point, and you saw glimpses of the aggression that she had there in the first round, but I thought for the most part, Yanakova was the one moving forward more and landing more with the punches and kicks. It came down to a split decision. The fans there in Austin were not happy when Yanakova's hand was raised there, with 2 judges giving her the 29-28 victory. I agree, Arteaga had an incredible first round, but that was her chance. She maxed out in the first round, and she didn't get it. She didn't get the finish. She tried her hardest. I mean, if there was any doubt that Yanakova could take a punch, I think this fight proved that, she can take a punch, and she can dish it out too. So I think this was a big step for Yanakova, not just making her a legitimate fighter, but making her someone people can kind of get behind, especially here in the United States. This was her first non-submission victory, and she was in a war. Well, I don't know if Ilyama McFarland is next for her. That's the fight that I think should be made. I don't know if it will. Obviously, she took quite a beating. It's probably going to be a while before she either steps back in the kickboxing ring or the Bellator cage, either one. So if McFarland, who fought back in July, wants to wait, then all right. But if she wants to get right back in there, this fight may have to wait to happen until 2017, potentially. Looking at the co-main event of the evening, Joe Warren back in action, of course, after his very disappointing loss and performance to Darion Caldwell in his last fight. And this was a typical Joe Warren performance. This was nothing out of the norm for Joe Warren against Serwin Kakai. And while Serwin definitely, did his best, he had some flashes of success. Joe Warren, for the most part, was able to dictate the pace. Obviously was able to take the fight to the ground, landed some good ground and pound, especially in round 2. That's when he started to open up Serwin. And in round 3, Serwin may be a little disoriented. Obviously probably tired from fending off those Joe Warren takedowns. Got caught with a big knee, got taken down again, and then Joe Warren was able to do what he couldn't do in the second round, and that's finish with a choke. Technically a guillotine choke at 104 in the third round, getting the victory there. And while I still think Joe Warren's career is pretty much done with that loss to Caldwell, I know he got hurt in the process, but I still don't think there's a lot left for Joe Warren. I mean, again, I'm not the one to tell a person when they're going to go. I'm just giving my opinion on it, and it's up to each fighter and their management and coaches and friends and family to determine when it's time to go. I think this was a good way to go out on top with a dominant victory, but knowing Joe Warren, he's going to not want to stop until he possibly gets another title shot. I don't know. We'll see. You maybe could see Joe Warren fight one more time against maybe someone a little higher up, but I don't see him capturing the Bellator championship again. He had a nice run here, and I think it's time to ride off into the sunset, and definitely he can be a guy that could be a coach down the line with either wrestling or mixed martial arts. Main event of the evening, Czech Congo against Tony Johnson. Was an all right fight overall. A pretty solid night of fights, contrary to popular belief. Czech Congo, Tony Johnson. The first round was kind of close, and then Congo got a late takedown, was landing some ground and pound, and really, to me, stole that first round. He did the most significant damage in that round. Was there towards the end. Second round was definitely Tony Johnson. He was able to get the fight down to the early, really showed off his grappling ability, had Congo in some bad spots, but Congo was able to hang on tough and not get choked out or finish. Into the third round, Congo pretty much reversed the tables. He was the one that was able to get an early takedown and pretty much control the fight from there. And I was okay. I was a little surprised that it came down as a majority decision, one judge calling it a draw. I guess I could see how you could score the first round a draw, but I think that late flurry, coupled with the takedown by Congo, gave him that round. So I think the other two judges got it right. I think it would have been disappointing to have a draw. Johnson definitely fought a good fight. Just little things like that in a close decision are what can tip the scales to your opponent. And for Congo, it's another win, but a guy that's still towards the end of his career. I don't know when or if Bellator's trying to bring their title back. Minkonov's been fighting in Russia, Volkov's been fighting in Russia. It's kind of just sitting there vacant. I don't know if they're waiting for one of those two guys to possibly come back, but to me, I don't know why a decision hasn't been made, why some mini tournament hasn't been made, why they haven't just gone ahead and announced a title fight between somebody. I don't know if they're waiting for someone to just have the greatest performance. I'm not really sure what they're waiting for, because I think if you're going to have a heavyweight division and have some decent heavyweights, not great, decent heavyweights, you should have a title for them. Otherwise, just get rid of the heavyweight division. And if you want to have a one-off, freak show fight at heavyweight or something, by all means do it because you're Bellator. But I think that a decision has to be made at least by the end of this year whether you're going to have somebody fight for the championship. Because I think the guys that are serious about holding a belt, they're starting to get tired. They're getting tired of waiting, and something has to be done with this division in the next couple of months. Looking at the other fight in Texas this past weekend, UFC Fight Night 94, Michael Johnson against Dustin Poirier. 6 fights were shown on the main card there for Fox Sports 1. They were down in Hidalgo, Texas, which is right near the border there of Mexico. And it kicked off in the featherweight division as Chaz Kelly took on Maximilian Blanco. Had the winner correct there in Chaz Kelly, I thought he would be able to go in, possibly a finish, but boy, not a record-setting submission in 19 seconds over Blanco, as they just came right out of the gate, right at each other, grappling, and all of a sudden, Skelly was working and grabbed the choke, locked it up, and got it in 19 seconds for the fastest UFC submission victory in history, netting him one of the Performance of the Night bonuses. And actually, that's pretty much a flawless victory. You really can't do better than submitting someone in record-setting fashion. So for Chaz Skelly, nice win for him. Like I said, a bounce-back win. And Blanco's a solid guy. He's no slouch. So beating someone that caliber that quickly is pretty excellent. So big credit there to Chaz Skelly there on getting the win. Also, real quickly, want to look over the undercard real quickly. Gabriel Benitez defeated Sam Sicilia. That's a big win there, submitting the Washington native in the second round at the 120 marker. Also, welterweight prospect Bilal Muhammad beat Augusto Montano, one of the former competitors there on the Tough Latin America, knocking him out in the third round after his war he had with Alan Joboy a few months ago in Las Vegas. So Muhammad getting his first victory in the UFC. Antonio Carlos Jr. with a very nice win, submitting Leonardo Augusto in the third round, getting back on the winning track there for Antonio Carlos Jr. Jose Caneros, if I said that correctly, defeated Joey Gomez. Also, one of the guys there from looking for a fight, Randy Brown, defeated the other Montano, Eric Montano. Not a good night for the Montanos there, as Randy Brown was able to submit him in the third round at the 18-second marker. And also, the night kicked off with a draw between Alejandro Perez and Albert Morales in the bantamweight division, if you were wondering how those went. Next fight of the evening, beginning back to the main card, Islam Makhachev against Chris Wade. And boy, if you talk about a grappling fight, you like grappling, that's what this fight was. But it was entertaining, at least to me it was. Maybe it wasn't to some, but I thought it was a very entertaining fight. The first round I definitely thought was Chris Wade. He was doing the more damage. Makhachev did have a takedown, didn't do much with it. He was able to get reversed. Chris Wade was on the top the majority of that round. Round 2, a couple of tactical errors there by Chris Wade. He had a couple opportunities to get back on top, much similar to the first round, but kind of failed on both those attempts. Makhachev took advantage of those, and what again was just a position battle round, as there was only a total of 16 strikes landed in the 5-minute round. Would have gave Makhachev round 2. Round 3, I don't know if Wade was tired or maybe his will was broken a little bit, but Makhachev definitely, to me, had his way with Chris Wade in round number 3. That same fire quite wasn't there for Wade, and Makhachev was able to take round 3 in a very nice round there, taking down Wade twice and outstriking him 38-7 to get the unanimous decision victory. And that seems to be Wade's weakness, is these guys from Dagestan. That's his second consecutive loss to a Russian fighter. His last fight was against Rustam Khabilov. So Makhachev, a nice bounce-back win for him. Definitely will have to work on the striking a little bit, but grappling-wise, pretty strong. And if he can grapple like that against the guy who I think is an excellent grappler in Chris Wade, that's going to help him a lot in this division, because there's a lot of strong jiu-jitsu and wrestler guys in this division. And if he can hang with a guy like Chris Wade, he can hang with just about anybody, grappling-wise. Next fight of the evening for UFC Fight Night 94. Roland Canero against Kenny Robinson. Canero's debut in the welterweight division, fought the majority of his career at middleweight. Not a great fight. Was alright. Both guys never really seemed to amp it up fully. I agree with giving the Canero the split decision. He definitely was landing the more impactful strikes of the two. He's the only one that tried takedowns. He attempted 6-0 for Robertson, which is surprising considering his wrestling background. Only successful on 2 of them, but he was at least trying to mix things up. You could tell that weight cut definitely was a drain on Canero. That's something he's obviously going to work on moving forward if he plans to stick at 170 pounds. But just kind of, other than a few kicks and a few punches by Canero, it was kind of Robertson coming forward with the weird head angle, weird hand angle, was backing him down, but wasn't really doing a whole lot of offense. And that, you're not going to win fights just simply working someone down up against the cage. You have to do some damage. You have to make them think twice about what they're doing, and either that or work for position. It just, I don't know, Robinson never really was pulling the trigger in any facet of this fight, and no surprise to me that he didn't get the nod from the judges. Next fight of the evening was in the lightweight division, and Evan Dunham threw everything but the kitchen sink at injury replacement and former World Series of Fighting champion Rick Glenn, who stepped up on short notice and up a weight class, has fought most of his career at 145 pounds against now top 15 ranked Evan Dunham. And he hung tough. I mean, he had a lot of spots where he looked like he was close to getting finished. He got taken down 3 times. He got outstruck 185-63 in the course of this fight, but just kept coming. Was taunting Dunham a couple of times, and the dude has a true warrior spirit. That is for sure. Whether or not he'll stick around at 155, I don't know. I would like to see Rick Glenn at a full camp before he makes that decision one way or the other, but he definitely is right at home there in a cage. So I think the UFC should definitely keep this kid around. And for Dunham, I mean, just a fantastic performance. Everything he wanted to do, he did, except get the finish. That's really the only thing he couldn't accomplish in this fight, and that was from no shortage of effort. And for Evan Dunham, he's now on a 4-fight winning streak, which I believe is his longest in the UFC. Yeah, he had his first 4 fights in the UFC he won when he beat Pierre Eklund, Marcus Aurelio, Efren Escudero, and Tyson Griffin. He had a really nice stretch there before losing to Sean Shirk and Melvin Gillard. That kind of started his string of mediocreness, really up until January of last year, where he won 3 fights inside of last year. This was his only fight so far here in 2016, so I don't know if we'll see Dunham before year's end or not. This obviously was a very dominant performance, we'll see, but obviously fighting someone else in the top 15 or inside the top 10 is what Dunham kind of needs next to put himself back on the radar of a title contender. And of course, when he came into the UFC, I mentioned those 4 wins he rattled off. He was a young guy. He was the hot prospect there in the division there, 2009, 2010, and really the last couple of years since, losing to Sean Shirk in 2010, kind of flamed out. A lot of people thought, he doesn't really have it left, especially when he lost 3 consecutive fights. Again, these are not to any slouches. Rafael Dos Anjos, Donald Cerrone, and Edson Barboza. I mean, those are not slouches. In fact, the Dos Anjos fight was pretty close from what I remember. So, this was not a guy that was losing to bums or anything like that. So, for him to kind of take all that in and come back and able now to rattle off 4 in a row. Now, these wins aren't against the greatest names, but 2 solid names in Joe Lazone and Ross Pearson, I think, definitely have to be looked at. And in all these wins, they have been dominant wins. They've been one-sided. They've been on his side. So that's the thing. It's not just he's winning. He's dominating these fights. None of these fights have really been close to his opponent. So that is the one thing. It's just he's really learned a lot from his experience in the octagon, and he's a force to be reckoned with. I really do. I don't know if he'll get to the title. There's some killers there towards the top, but he's a tricky matchup for a lot of people in this division, that is for sure. Co-main event of the evening in the middleweight division as Uriah Hall took on Derek Brunson. I thought there was going to be a knockout, but I thought it was Hall knocking out Brunson. However, it ended up being Derek Brunson with another quick knockout victory, knocking out the native of New York in just 141. A little bit of a quick stoppage on the part of Herb Dean, which is surprising considering I hold Herb, and most people do, in a very high regard in the referee game. And I think he could have let this one go on a tad longer. However, Hall was definitely rocked. There is no doubt about that from one of those straight rights there of Derek Brunson. And Hall, a guy who hasn't been finished like that in quite a while, that was awfully impressive. He's knocked out quite a few people now in a row. I believe this is his fourth one in a row. They kind of mentioned, he didn't go to Jackson's for this camp, but it didn't seem to affect him at all. I mean, really, he started out, had a really nice run there in Strikeforce, had won 3 fights in a row, and then he ran into a guy by the name of Jacare Souza back in August of 2012, getting knocked out in 40 seconds. He came into the UFC and had a very, lackluster unanimous decision win over Chris Lieben back in December of 2012, and then he was able to submit Brian Houston. That kind of started, to me, his maturation from a guy that was just a wrestler to a guy that can actually finish you when he submitted Brian Houston there back in November 2013. He lost to Romero in what was a fight of the night performance back in January 2014, getting knocked out by Romero in the 3rd round. And that was a good fight, and really that was another turning point, taking on a guy that caliber and having a fight of the night performance. And since then, he's rattled off some 5 consecutive victories, being the likes of Lorenz Larkin, Ed Herman, Sam Alvey, Canero, and now Uriah Hall, winning by first-round knockout and now 4 consecutive fights. A guy who really wasn't even known for a finisher when he came into the UFC has now finished 4 people inside the first round. And man, with his wrestling ability now coupled with this kind of newfound power and finishing ability, he is a guy you got to look out for in this middleweight division. He's definitely earned himself a big fight coming up. I know he was supposed to take on Gegard Mousasi at UFC 200. I think possibly he faces the winner of Vitor and Mousasi. I think that is a good matchup to make. Tim Kennedy's booked there against Rashad Evans. Chris Weidman's now booked up against Yoel Romero, and Luke Rockhold is booked up against Jacques Ray. And, of course, the title for the middleweight division will be decided here in a few weeks as Michael Bisping defends against Dan Henderson. So a lot of the top guys are booked. He is obviously ready to go. So he's going to have to wait until one of those fights kind of plays out, and that's all happening here in the next couple weeks. So depending on how those fights go, we may see Derek Brunson one more time. But if he wants to take on somebody that's maybe, and I believe Robert Whittaker also got booked, I think, or rumors has it that he was gonna get booked against Anderson Silva. I don't know if that's truth or not. I don't think that's been secure, but that's a rumor. So that's another guy in the top 2. So for Derek Brunson, he's kind of gonna have to wait a little bit here to take on someone, which is unfortunate because he's probably ready to go after getting hurt and then getting this fight, a fight that he really wanted. So, plus who knows, maybe some of those guys get injured and Derek Brunson is able to fill in. So a guy that should be ready if the chance to fight a big-time opponent happens here in the next few weeks. Main events of the evening, Michael Johnson against Dustin Poirier. I think a lot of people were against Michael Johnson heading into this fight. I think a lot of people thought that the Nate Diaz fight was maybe the end of him as a contender. But let's not forget, Michael Johnson probably won the first round this fight. And the Diaz brothers have a way of sucking people into their game. And Michael Johnson very much played into that game in rounds 2 and 3 and fought Nate Diaz kind of fight. He didn't fight a Michael Johnson type of fight. And I think he took a couple months. Obviously, he hadn't fought since December. So he took a couple months, then kind of realized, like, all right, that was a good fight. I lost, but I need to fight my fight. I can't get into other people's games, and I need to work on that. And I think he did, because there were some head games between these two. Obviously, a rivalry between the two gyms already existed before the matchup was announced, the Black Zillions and American Top Team, Poirier from ATT, Michael Johnson from the Black Zillions. So there already was going to be some animosity between the two, besides any personal sort of trash talk. So the X factor for me was the wrestling, but we didn't even get to see that. As maybe it's Poirier's crutch. Like I said, anytime he takes on elite competition, he has faltered a little bit. And this was a guy the ranking showed was below him, but I think skill-wise is right there and was able to just catch him early and put him away. And Dustin really never got a chance to show whether or not he could hold up to wrestling of Michael Johnson. But credit to the Menace. He got the job done there in the first round. He's now firmly back inside the top 10. He's back where he was before the Nate Diaz fight. And he's a guy who does own some good wins in the UFC. I mean, current top contender, probably one fight away from a title shot in Tony Ferguson. He owns a win over Tony Ferguson, the only guy so far to beat him inside the UFC. So Michael Johnson does have some feathers in his cap, and definitely I think gets a big fight next. I don't know. A rematch with Nate I think is tempting. I think a matchup against Khabib Nurmagomedov I think would be very excellent to end the year. And if Khabib beats a guy the caliber of Michael Johnson, I think it's hard to disagree. He's ready for a shot at the UFC championship. UFC Fight Night 95 will be this weekend on Fox Sports 1, as the 6-fight main card will actually be down in Brazil, and it will feature the return of Christine Cyborg to the UFC for her second catchweight fight, this time in the main event. Speaking of Christine Cyborg, of course, she is still currently the Invicta featherweight champion. And in speaking of Invicta, they will hold Invicta FC 19 this weekend exclusively on the UFC Fight Pass from Kansas City, highlighted with the main event title fight, Jennifer Maia against Roxanne Modafferi for the featherweight championship. Also, notable names, Irene Aldana will be featured on the card. She will be taking on Faith Van Duyn. Also, Amber Leacock will be taking on Amy Coleman. And the biggest fight, probably besides those ones, is the Invicta debut of Tiffany Van Soest. Tiffany Time Bomb, also signed to a Glory kickboxing contract as well. Of course, she's participating in Glory's first ever Women's Grand Prix tournament to crown the first ever Glory Women's Champion, which is at 121 pounds for Glory. The super bantamweight is what they call that. In Invicta, she will be fighting at 125 pounds. She's only had one mixed martial arts fight to her career. She got submitted in the first round. I believe that was a fight over in Japan. She will be taking on a girl just as green in Kaylin Schwartz, who will be making her professional debut against Tiffany Time Bomb, who, if you watched Glory 33 this past weekend, again, I'm going to have a link pop up right here on the bottom of the screen to take you to my thoughts on Glory 33, as well as a little preview and a little bit of a rant there on Bellator kickboxing. But if you saw Glory 33, you would have seen the performance of one fighter by the name of Gladstone, who was the replacement for Zoe Lafrashtow, that being Jessica Gladstone. And with her victory, she will be taking on Tiffany Van Soest in the second round of Glory's tournament, with the winner getting a chance to fight for the title for Glory. And if you saw that fight, Tiffany has her work cut out for her, taking on Jessica Gladstone, who had an incredible performance on short notice against a much more experienced fighter in Graf. So Tiffany has her work cut out for her, not only mixed martial art-wise. A lot of pressure is on her, being a big notable signing for Invicta and Glory, and obviously what happens inside the Glory ring too. So a lot of people will have their eyes on that Tiffany Time Bomb matchup against Kaylin Schwartz. All right, as I mentioned, UFC Fight Night 95, that's going to kick off first in the featherweight division as Godfredo Pepe takes on Mike De La Torre, and this is a matchup in the featherweight division. Pepe had some moments in his last fight against Darren Elkins, but overall let Elkins dictate the pace. And one thing about Pepe is that sometimes he's too comfortable off his back, and that was definitely something that plagued him in the Darren Elkins fight. A guy that's what he likes to do, is take the fight to the ground and hold people there and beat them up. So that was kind of the wrong strategy to me against a guy like that. And Mike De La Torre, now he's not Darren Elkins, that's for sure. So that is a good thing for Pepe. But he is a guy that finishes a lot of fights, has finished 12 of his 14 fights, 6 by knockout, 6 by way of submission. So far in the UFC, he's 2-2 with a no contest. He had a no contest against T-City Brian Ortega back in July 2014. He did win his last fight in November of last year against Yu Chi Nam, and I think if it stays standing, this is a pretty 50-50 fight. I think that's probably where it's going to stay, and I think it's going to be entertaining. Both guys have knockout ability. Both guys can be creative strikers and do things creatively in the grappling game, and that's an X factor. Even though Pepe is willing to be on his back, he is good off his back. It's not like he can't throw up submissions from those positions. And he has the majority of his wins coming by way of submission. So I think it's going to be an entertaining fight and a fun fight to kick off the card. And we'll see how it goes. Obviously, Mike De La Torre has fought some of his career in the bantamweight division, so that will be interesting to see how he does here at featherweight, despite being taller than Pepe. It still should be an interesting fight. He's 4 inches taller, but Pepe has a 2-inch reach advantage. You don't see that too often, so I think this is going to be a good fight, and Pepe always seems to deliver, especially when they're fighting down there in Brazil. Eric Spicely against Thiago Santos will be the next matchup in the middleweight division. Eric Spicely coming off a loss in his debut to Sam Alvey, getting submitted by Alvey in the first round. Thiago Santos has definitely had some ups and downs in his career, but definitely a guy that is a very powerful striker, especially with his kicks. 13-4 so far in his career. He is coming off a loss to Gegard Mousasi in a fight he did take on short notice there at UFC 200. That snapped a 4-fight winning streak, beating the likes of Andy N, Steve Bosse, Elias Theodorou, and Nate Marquardt in that stretch, which is some good guys there. And I think that fight against Gegard, Gegard is a very technical guy, and he maybe wasn't ready for that. Add in the short notice aspect. I think that's a fight with the full camp goes a little differently, and I think Thiago, though, learned a lot about himself in that fight. And for Eric Spicely, I think he's going to, unfortunately, be on the wrong side of some of those lessons that Thiago Santos learned. Spicely is a decent grappler. We saw that on his tenure there on The Ultimate Fighter. But Thiago Santos, I think, look at the fight there against Elias Theodorou. He's a tough dude to take down. And if it stays standing, Spicely's going to be in a world of hurt. Santos can end you with just mainly kicks. I mean, he has some good punches, but his kicks are absolutely brutal, not just to the head, but he's knocked out people with body kicks too. So this is a guy that you got to take space away from him, being close, and make this a dirty fight in close and not allow this guy have space to uncork those powerful kicks of his. Next fight of the evening in the lightweight division. I think this is an incredible fight. Paul Felder against Francisco Trinaldo. Both guys have been on a roll as of late, as I believe Trinaldo has won 3 or 4 fights in a row, and I think Felder is on a 2 or 3 fight winning streak himself. And this is a good fight for both guys to kind of test themselves, and I think a win by either puts themselves in the top 15. For Felder, after having winning his first 2 fights in the UFC, lost 2 fights, close fights, tough fights, and good fights to Ross Pearson and Edson Barboza. He has since returned with 2 great performances, submitting Darren Cruikshank earlier this year and then defeating Josh Berkman in a very dominant performance back in May of this year. And Trinaldo, another guy that was on the Ultimate Fighter Brazil, after kind of trading some wins and losses since his tenure on the show dating back to June of 2012, he has really put it together since losing to Michael Chiesa back in May of 2014. He's actually rattled off 6 consecutive victories beating some tough guys like Norman Park, Leandro Silva, Chad Laprise, Ross Pearson, and most recently a Fight of the Night performance and win over Yancy Medeiros at UFC 198. Now taking on a very dynamic striker in Paul Felder. I think Trinaldo probably has maybe a little more power, especially in his hands. But one thing about Trinaldo, he's a little bit of a slow starter, but he is very technical and a guy that is kind of somewhat of a machine. He kind of keeps going forward at that same pace. He's hard to read. He doesn't, show you that he's hurt or he's tired or anything. He's a guy that likes to move forward. He does have some submission ability. He's a solid grappler. Paul Felder, I think, has really advanced in that part of his game. People think of him as just a striker, but I think he has developed. He is a solid grappler of his own. However, I don't think he wants a grappling match with Francisco Trinaldo, who is a very big 155-pounder, very strong, very muscular guy. And if you're Paul Felder, you want to take this fight at range, and you have to be ready to circle a lot, cut footwork and angles, because Trinaldo, he's a hard guy to counter. He's going to be moving forward. So you got to be ready to strike from the outside. And if you can, make sure you can keep off the back against the cage. Make him chase you and try to wear out. Look for your opportunities to strike in combinations. You can't just beat this guy with one or two shots. You have to pepper him, get out, make you chase you, frustrate him there. Maybe you force him into a desperate punch or a desperate takedown, and you can take advantage of it. That would be what I would do for Paul Felder. Looking at the next fight of the evening, Roy Nelson against Bigfoot Silva. Roy Nelson had a very disappointing performance in his last fight against Derek Lewis, where for whatever reason Roy Nelson just didn't want to fight Derek Lewis, and that was unfortunate because that's a fight that I thought was going to be very entertaining. Somebody was going to get knocked out silly and cold, but that was not really the case there, and very disappointing fight there. Surprisingly, these two have never fought each other before, considering how long they've been in the UFC, entering right around the same time, have never crossed paths before, have fought a lot of the same guys. Bigfoot Silva, towards the end of his career, as dating back to his title loss against Cain Velasquez, has only won one fight in the last 3 years, and that includes his Fight of the Year-esque performance draw against Mark Hunt in December of 2013. His only win coming over Saul Paleli back in August of last year, knocking out the New Zealander in the second round. And I think this is Bigfoot Silva's last fight, or should be, win or lose. I think they're giving him a fight in Brazil to go out to the home fans there, win or lose. And I don't think he has much left in the tank. I just think the hits his skull, as big as it is taken over the years, I think are finally starting to add up, and I just don't think he has much left. And for Roy Nelson, he's old too, but he hasn't taken quite the bad knockout losses that Silva has, and I think this is going to be Big Country's fight. Maybe Big Silva amps it up one more time to win there down in Brazil, but I think this is probably Roy Nelson, and it could be Roy Nelson's last fight too. Or I mean that maybe he has a couple more left, but I think it's a guy that also should be looking to end it here pretty soon. Maybe not in Brazil. He's a Vegas guy, so maybe they give him another fight in Vegas. But I think win or lose, this will be Bigfoot Silva's last fight. Co-main event of the evening, former UFC bantamweight champion Renan Barão, now fighting at 145 pounds, will take on former Ultimate Fighter runner-up in Philippe Nover. Barão, in his debut against Jeremy Stephens, had an incredible first round against Jeremy Stephens, but then started to feel the power and the strength and the wrestling ability of Jeremy Stephens in round 2 or 3. And it was an incredible fight. Definitely showed that he has some speed, but the ability to kind of be strong in a weight class like he was in bantamweight, at least wasn't apparent there against Jeremy Stephens. So a guy that's definitely going to have to bulk up if he wants to stick around here in this 45 division. Now, Lucky's taking on Philippe Nover, who's not a huge guy by any means, but definitely is a solid featherweight. But a guy that's kind of had a very interesting career. Obviously, he came a lot of hype. Of course, there was the time when Dana White called Philippe Nover the next Anderson Silva. That is an actual quote. He lost 3 fights in a row, was then released from the organization, dropped down to featherweight, kind of bounced around from different organizations. 5 years later, returned to the UFC in May of last year, fighting in the Philippines. I believe he is Filipino. Got the win there, a split decision over Yul Chal Nam. Then lost his next fight in December of last year to Zarbaria Turgov, if I said that correctly, another split decision. So he's kind of been more of a grinder in his return, a lot more apt to the wrestling game, was known more for as a striker when he first entered the UFC back on The Ultimate Fighter years ago. And I think this is an interesting matchup because I think this is trying to get Barao a victory because he maybe fought someone a little too high up than he should have, and Jeremy Stevens should have got his feet wet. This is the type of guy he maybe should have had for his first fight at 145. I think this is an easier fight for Barao. That doesn't mean Nover can't win, but I think Barao is just a better overall fighter, and I think for Nover, he has to try to wear on Barao. Especially, like I said, he's maybe a little smaller for this division. He's going to be the bigger guy. He's going to be 3 inches taller, have a 2-inch bigger reach. So if you can wear on Barao, make him carry that weight, a guy that has had some trouble with conditioning over his career, get this thing into the second or third rounds, maybe he can eke out another decision or split decision. But if it stays at range, you allow Barao to dictate the pace of this fight and get off those great combinations that he's capable of, it could be a very short and brutal night for Mr. Nover. Speaking of brutal, the beast that is Chris Cyborg will make her second appearance in the UFC against newcomer to the organization in Lena Landsberg, coming out of Sweden, 6-1 in her career, has never fought in the UFC before, and has never fought in any major organization ever. And taking on Cyborg here in a catchweight main event in Brazil once again. This should be Cyborg wrecking another chick. I mean, no offense to Lena Landsberg, but I don't see how she can come out of nowhere, and no one's ever heard of her, and beat some of the caliber of Cyborg Santos. I mean, stranger things have happened in the sport, but I don't think this is going to be one of them. And I think this is a very curious booking by the UFC, putting a newcomer in the main event against Cyborg. Was there no one else on the UFC roster they could get to fight Cyborg? There was a whole bunch of women that said they would fight Cyborg. A lot of them are coming off losses, and they would have a lot to gain if they could beat someone the caliber of Chris Cyborg. And where did those go? Are they now scared of Cyborg? Are they just not willing to fight? I mean, to me, this is a pretty big deal. You can make a lot of notoriety. I mean, women aren't featured in main events too often, especially non-title. This will only be the third ever non-title women's fight to be featured on a main event. Now, women have now been featured in the UFC for 4 years. So, and this is the first one on Fox Sports 1. First one was on Fight Pass. Second one was on Fox. This will be the first one on Fox Sports 1. I don't know if it's that big a deal, but it is a big deal in terms of main event, just because the women are starting to get more main events like this, and you would think that somebody like a Holly Holm or a Kat Zingano or maybe even like an Alexis Davis or a Sarah Kaufman or somebody that, has really nothing to lose, in a division, or even a Sarah McMahon. Nothing to lose, everything to gain. So, I don't know. Maybe this is another win will start to get Cyborg some more high-profile opponents. I don't know, but good luck to Ms. Landsberg. You have your work cut out for her, and hopefully the UFC gave you a good insurance package to take on Cyborg. With that said, let's get to the picks here for UFC Fight Night 95 down in Brasilia, the capital of Brazil. First fight of the evening, Pepe against Mike De La Torre. I like Pepe in this matchup. I really do. I think that it's going to be a fun fight, a good fight. De La Torre can absolutely win, but I like Pepe in Brazil. Thiago Santos against Eric Spicely. Spicely did not look that great. Obviously getting submitted by Sam Alvey. I think he's going to have a tough time against Thiago Santos, who I think is looking to prove something after his fight there against Musasi, get back on the winning track. So give me Thiago Santos in this one. Francisco Trinaldo against Paul Felder. Man, this is a really good fight. I'm going to go with Francisco Trinaldo. This dude has just been on an absolute tear as of late, and I think that's going to continue here against the Irish Dragon. Roy Nelson against Bigfoot Silva. I like to see Bigfoot Silva go out on top. He was one of the top guys in the heavyweight division for a very long time, but I think Roy Nelson will put the final nail in the Bigfoot Silva coffin down in Brazil. Renan Barão against Philippe Nover. I gotta pick Renan Barão. I haven't really been that impressed with Nover since returning to the UFC. Really wasn't even that much impressed with him when he was in the UFC the first time. So I'm gonna go with Renan Barão to win this one. And if my pick wasn't already kind of made in the breakdown there, definitely Chris Cyborg over Lena Landsberg in what should be another dominant first round finish by the current Invicta and former Strikeforce champion. Also, if you haven't seen the link pop up already, I'll pop it up again. I can pop it up again and also be in the comments there. Check out my breakdown of Glory 33. Excellent night of fights there in New Jersey. I also talk a little bit about Bellator kickboxing as well, and why Bellator Kickboxing 3 was on tape delay. That's actually happening this Friday night on Spike TV, but actually happened live and in person in Turkey last weekend. So I'll talk about that as well, and hopefully have an interview for you to be coupled with that too. Also, before I end the show, undercard, some solid fights here on the undercard. Eric Silva will be featured on the undercard. Big matchup in the flyweight division, Jussier Formiga against Dustin Ortiz. Also, Hanayaya against Mishinori Takanaka. And also Gilbert Burns against Michel Prazeres. Also, I think a solid fight on the FS1 prelims at 155 pounds. And also, former guest, and hopefully we have him on if he wins, Stevie Ray takes on Alan Patrick. That should be a good fight there at 155 as well. And also a guy I'm a really big fan of, Vincente Luque, will be taking on Hector Urbina. Once again, I'm your host, Jim Graham. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Graham. You can follow me on Instagram at the Jim Graham. You can like Beyond the Cage on Facebook, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. We are now just 20 likes away from 500 and starting our 500 likes contest. And of course, if you're watching here on YouTube, please subscribe if you haven't already. Like and share all the videos and that good stuff at youtube.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. You can also listen to the show audio version on the Stitcher mobile app for podcasting. You can also catch the show on iTunes and Google Play. And also, I've been taking a lot of the recent interviews in the last month or two and putting them on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/Jim Graham. If you missed any interviews or you just want to hear the interview of a particular show, I will have it up on my SoundCloud, another way for you to check out Beyond the Cage. So, thank you to the supporters of Beyond the Cage, Flying Brian J, Gorilla the Bear, a.k.a. Adam Nelson, the MMAcommunity.com, MMA Fight Club online at MMAFightClub.net, and on Facebook at Facebook.com/MMA Fight Club. I would also like to thank MMAforlife.ca, MMAinsider.net, Top Rated MMA, AJ Hiller running the #1 source for mixed martial arts memorabilia in the world at MMASignaturesUSA.com. Once again, I am Jim Graham, and thank you for listening to another edition of Beyond the Cage.